Snow buries the world outside a lonely wooden house on the edge of a Montana town, its flakes piling against warped planks and a sagging porch. The wind howls, clawing at the shingles, as a faint light leaks from a cracked window, the only sign of life in the frozen dark. Inside, the kitchen is a relic of faded warmth, its linoleum floor cold underfoot, its walls stained by years of neglect. A single bulb dangles from a frayed cord, swaying in the draft, casting shadows over a scarred wooden table. Walter Jenkins, 63. His frame gaunt and silver hair clinging to his scalp, hunches over an unfinished chair, sanding its rough edges with trembling hands. The faint tremor in his fingers, a ghost of a stroke, slows his work, but his eyes burn with stubborn focus. A small wooden box, carved with the initials W and M, sits beside him, its surface worn smooth by time. He hums a broken tune, barely audible over the wind's wail, his breath clouding in the chilly air. The chair, half-formed, seems to hold a piece of him, a tether to a life when love filled this house. He pauses, fingers grazing the box, his gaze distant, as if seeing a memory. A woman's laugh, a child's smile, before he resumes sanding, the rasp of wood a quiet defiance against the storm. A floorboard creaks, sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence. Walter's head lifts, hope flickering in his weary eyes. "Brian, is that you, son?" He calls, his voice soft, almost afraid to break the moment. Brian Jenkins, 28, slouches into view, his hoodie stained, his eyes sunken and shadowed by sleepless nights. Earbuds dangle from his neck, leaking faint music, and a beer bottle hangs loosely in his hand. His gaze, cold and heavy, flicks to the chair, then to Walter, carrying a resentment that chills the room more than the snow outside. Walter forces a smile, his voice thin. "Just working on this chair. Thought it might spruce up the place." Brian's lips twitch, a silent rebuke. He takes a slow sip of beer, the bottle glinting under the bulb's dim glow. Walter reaches for a hammer, his movements stiff, his boot snagging a rusted nail jutting from the floor. He stumbles, crashing to the ground with a sharp gasp, the hammer clattering away, wood shavings scattering like ash. Pain twists his face as he clutches his knee. "Khan, jup cha dua kong Brian?" he whispers, his trembling hand reaching out, his eyes pleading for a spark of care. Brian stands motionless, his shadow stretching across the floor. The wind screams, rattling the windows, filling the silence. His jaw tightens, and without a word, he turns, boots thudding on the creaking floor, disappearing into the dark hall. The door slams, the sound swallowed by the storm. Walter lies still, breath shallow, the cold seeping into his bones. Slowly, he drags himself to his knees, gripping the table's edge. His eyes find the rusted nail, its dull glint a quiet accusation. He reaches for the wooden box, fingers tracing the initials, and opens it. Inside, a faded photo of a young Brian beside his mother rests atop a crumpled child's drawing, its colors long faded. A tear traces Walter's cheek as he clutches the box, the snow piling higher outside, sealing the house in its icy grip. The snow keeps falling outside the Jenkins house, heavier now, muffling the Montana night as it buries the porch in a cold, white shroud. Inside, the kitchen has given way to the cramped dining room, where a small table sits under the same flickering bulb, its weak light pooling on a chipped bowl of canned soup and a plate of sliced bread. Walter Jenkins, his face etched with the weight of 63 years, moves slowly, setting two mismatched plates with care, as if the act could mend something broken. His hands, still sore from last night's fall, tremble as he smooths a frayed napkin, his eyes darting to the empty doorway. The wind rattles the windows, a low moan that fills the silence, and the unfinished chair, pushed to the corner, looms like a ghost of his efforts. The wooden box, carved with W and M, rests on a shelf nearby, its presence a quiet anchor. Walter's breath clouds in the chilly air as he ladles soup, the clink of the spoon against the bowl sharp in the stillness. Footsteps thud on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. Brian Jenkins slouches into the room, his hoodie dirtier than yesterday, his eyes shadowed by resentment and sleepless nights. He drops into a chair, phone in hand, scrolling without looking up, the faint buzz of music leaking from his earbuds. Walter forces a smile, his voice thin but hopeful. "Glad you're here, son. Dinner's ready. Just soup and bread, but it's warm." Brian doesn't respond, his thumbs swiping the screen, the light casting harsh shadows on his hollow cheeks. Walter sits, his chair creaking, and takes a cautious sip of soup, watching Brian over the rim of his spoon. The silence stretches, thick and suffocating, broken only by the wind's wail and the distant drip of a leaky faucet. Walter clears his throat, grasping for connection. "I was thinking, maybe I could talk to Thompson at the lumber yard. He remembers you, says you were good with your hands. Could be a job there if you want." Brian's hand freezes on the phone, his jaw tightening. He looks up, eyes blazing with a fire that's been smoldering for years. "Don't pretend you care," he snaps, his voice low and venomous. "You ruined my life, you know that? Always pushing me, telling me what to be. You remember when I wanted to draw? You called it a waste, said I had to work in your damn shop. I hated that place, hated the smell of wood, hated you." His fist slams the table, the soup sloshing over the bowl's edge. Walter flinches, his spoon clattering to the plate, his face paling as the words cut deep. A memory flickers, unbidden. Brian, 14, standing in the workshop, holding a sketch of a mountain under a starry sky. Walter, exhausted from a double shift, barely glances at it. "Study hard, Brian. Don't waste time on dreams that won't feed you," he'd said, his voice sharp. Brian's face had crumpled, the sketch torn in two, the pieces fluttering to the sawdust-covered floor. Back in the dining room, Walter's lips part, but no words come. Brian shoves his chair back, the screech of wood on linoleum piercing the air, and storms out, his boots pounding up the stairs. The door slams, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Walter sits alone, the soup cooling untouched, the bulb flickering above. His eyes drift to the wooden box on the shelf, its carved initials catching the light. He rises, joints creaking, and lifts it down, his fingers tracing the worn edges. He opens it, revealing the faded photo of Brian and his mother, and beneath it, the crumpled sketch, its torn halves taped together long ago. His hands tremble, a quiet grief settling in his chest as he stares at the boy he lost, the wind howling outside, the snow sealing the house in its icy embrace. Morning light filters through the heavy snow clouds, casting a pale glow over the Jenkins house, its wooden frame half hidden by drifts piled high against the porch. The wind has softened to a low hum, but the cold still bites, seeping into the Montana air as the town stirs faintly in the distance. Outside, the crunch of boots on fresh snow announces a visitor. Linda Parker, 40, her face lined with quiet resilience, tucks a tin of homemade cookies under her arm, her nurse's coat flapping as she approaches the sagging front door. Her breath clouds in the chill, her eyes scanning the house with a mix of concern and determination. A shadow of her own past, memories of a father's raised hand, lingering in her gaze. She knocks, the sound sharp against the stillness, and waits, her fingers tightening on the tin. Inside, Walter Jenkins shuffles toward the door, his steps uneven, his 63 years weighing heavier today. His sweater hangs loose on his gaunt frame, and a faint bruise blooms on his cheek, purple against his weathered skin. He opens the door, forcing a tired smile as he sees Linda, his hands fidgeting, betraying the ache from his fall days ago. "Linda, didn't expect you," he says, his voice thin but warm, stepping aside to let her in. The room beyond is dim, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and neglect. The unfinished chair sits in the corner, a silent reminder of his struggle, while the wooden box, carved with W and M, rests on a shelf, its presence a quiet tether to the past. Linda sets the cookies on the table, her eyes catching the bruise before Walter can turn away. "Made these last night," she says, her tone gentle but probing. Thought you might like something sweet. Walter nods, easing into a chair with a wince, his movements stiff. You're too kind, he murmurs, avoiding her gaze, his fingers brushing the table's scarred surface. Linda sits across from him, her hands folded, her nurse's instincts sharpening. You all right, Walter? You're limping. And that bruise. Her voice trails off, soft but insistent, her eyes searching his face. Walter's smile falters, his hand rising to touch the bruise before dropping quickly. Just clumsy, he says too fast. Took a tumble on the stairs. Nothing to fuss over. The lie hangs between them, fragile as the snow outside. Linda's brow furrows, her mind flickering to her own childhood. The excuses her mother made for marks that weren't accidents. She leans forward, her voice steady but laced with concern. You sure you're okay here? Is Brian around much? Walter stiffens, his eyes darting to the stairs, where Brian's absence feels like a weight. He's busy, he says, his tone clipped, forcing another smile. Young folks, you know, always somewhere else. He reaches for a cookie, his hand trembling, and changes the subject. How's that hospital of yours? Keeping you on your toes? Linda hesitates, her gaze lingering on the bruise, then on the wooden box, its carved initials catching the weak light. She wants to press, to ask about the shadows in this house, but Walter's guarded eyes stop her. She rises, smoothing her coat, her voice soft but firm. If you ever need to talk, Walter, you know where I am. He nods, his smile brittle, and walks her to the door. As she steps into the snow, Linda glances back, her eyes narrowing with quiet resolve, the house's silence louder than the wind. Walter closes the door, his breath shallow, and shuffles to the shelf. His fingers trace the wooden box, opening it to reveal the photo of Brian and his mother, the taped-together sketch beneath it. His face crumples, a quiet grief settling as he clutches the box, the snow outside falling softer now, blanketing the world in a deceptive calm. The snow falls harder now, cloaking the Jenkins house in a relentless Montana winter, its flakes battering the warped wooden walls as the wind howls like a grieving thing. Inside, the cramped living room feels smaller, the air thick with the sour tang of spilled beer and unspoken wounds. The flickering bulb overhead casts jagged shadows, barely illuminating the scarred table where the unfinished chair once stood. Now that chair, a relic Walter had been shaping with trembling hands, sits in the center of the room, its rough edges a silent testament to his fading strength. Walter Jenkins, 63, his gaunt frame hunched in a worn armchair, grips a chipped mug of coffee, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. The bruise on his cheek has darkened, a quiet mark of the days since Linda's visit. The wooden box, carved with W and M, rests on a shelf behind him, its presence a faint anchor in the storm brewing within these walls. Heavy footsteps stumble down the stairs, uneven and angry. Brian Jenkins lurches into the room, his hoodie stained, his eyes bloodshot from too much drink and too little sleep. A near-empty beer bottle dangles from his hand, and his voice cuts through the silence, sharp and slurred. Where's the money, old man? I know you've got some stashed away. Walter's head lifts, his face tightening, but his voice stays soft, almost pleading. There's nothing left, Brian. You know that. Every cent went to keeping this roof over us. Brian snorts, his laugh bitter, his body swaying as he steps closer. Keeping us? You mean keeping me trapped here, in your miserable life? You're useless, you know that? Always were. His words land like blows, each one heavier than the last. Walter's hands tighten on the mug, his knuckles white, but he holds his tongue, his eyes flickering with a pain that runs deeper than the bruise. Brian's gaze lands on the chair, its unfinished form a mockery of his father's efforts. This junk, he mutters, kicking the leg of the chair. You waste your time on this while I've got nothing. Walter's voice breaks through, sharp for the first time. That chair's not junk. I made it for your mother, before you were born. The words hang, fragile, and for a moment, Brian pauses, his eyes narrowing. Then, rage flares, raw and uncontained. With a roar, He grabs the chair and smashes it against the floor, the wood splintering with a sickening crack. The armrest snaps, pieces skittering across the linoleum, and the sound echoes like a heart breaking. Walter lurches to his feet, his face crumpling, his voice a strangled whisper. "Brian, no." But Brian is already gone, staggering out the door into the snowy night, the slam of the frame rattling the house. Walter stands frozen, his breath shallow, the wreckage of the chair at his feet. A memory floods in, unbidden. He and Mary, young and laughing, sitting on that chair under a summer sky. Little Brian, 5, playing nearby, his giggles filling the air. The chair had been her favorite, a gift he'd carved with love, now shattered like the family it once held. Walter sinks to his knees, his trembling hands gathering the broken pieces, each splinter a wound. His eyes sting as he carries them to the wooden box, opening it to reveal the photo of Brian and Mary, the taped-together sketch beneath. He places the fragments inside, his fingers lingering on the initials, his grief a quiet weight. The snow outside piles higher, the winds wail a mournful echo of his loss. If this story of broken bonds and unspoken love touches your heart, subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys like Walter's, where pain and hope collide in the silence of a fractured home. The snow falls in a relentless whisper outside the Jenkins house, sealing the Montana night in a cocoon of cold, its flakes tapping softly against the darkened windows. Inside, a narrow staircase leads to Walter Jenkins' bedroom, where the air is heavy with the scent of dust and old wood. A single candle flickers on a small table, its flame dancing weakly, casting trembling shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Walter, 63, sits hunched over the table, his gaunt frame swallowed by a threadbare sweater, his silver hair glinting in the dim light. His hands, scarred by years of carpentry and weakened by a stroke, tremble as he grips a pen, the nib scratching against a sheet of paper. The wooden box, carved with the initials W and M, rests beside him, its worn surface catching the candle's glow. Walter's breath clouds in the chilly air, his eyes heavy with a grief that has settled deep in his bones. He writes, his words halting and jagged, "Brian, I'm sorry if I failed you. I only wanted you to be strong. I'm leaving so you can be free." Each stroke of the pen feels like a cut, his face crumpling as he pauses, staring at the empty space beside the paper. "Mary," he whispers, his voice breaking, as if his wife could hear him from beyond the grave. "Did I push him too hard? Was I wrong to want him to be better than me?" The question hangs, unanswered, and his gaze drifts to the wooden box. He opens it, fingers brushing the faded photo of Brian and Mary, the taped-together sketch of a mountain beneath it, drawn by a boy who once dreamed. A memory stirs, Mary's gentle voice, urging him to be patient with their son. His own sharp reply that discipline would make Brian strong. Walter's eyes sting, a tear falling onto the letter, smudging the ink. He crumples the first draft, tossing it aside, and starts again, his hand shaking harder now. "I love you, son, even if I never showed it right." He writes, the words a confession and a farewell. The wind howls outside, rattling the window, as if urging him to finish. A soft knock echoes from downstairs, faint but insistent. Walter freezes, his pen stilling, but the sound comes again, pulling him from his despair. He shuffles down the creaking stairs, candle in hand, and opens the door to find Linda Parker, her nurse's coat dusted with snow, a small bottle of pills in her hand. Her face softens at the sight of him, but her eyes narrow, catching the pallor of his skin, the weight of his grief. "Thought you might need these," she says, her voice gentle but firm, stepping inside. The candlelight flickers as she follows him to the bedroom, her gaze falling on the open letter, the crumpled paper beside it. Walter tries to cover it, his hands clumsy, but Linda's voice cuts through, sharp with concern. "Walter, what's this? You're not thinking of—" She trails off, her own past, a father's violence, a mother's silence, flashing in her mind. Walter's shoulders sag, his voice barely a whisper.
"I'm tired, Linda.
Maybe he's better off without me. Linda kneels beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her eyes fierce. You don't get to give up, Walter. Not on yourself, not on Brian. He needs you, even if he doesn't know it. Her words pierce the fog of his despair, and Walter looks at her, his eyes glistening. He nods, slow and reluctant, the letter left unfinished on the table. Linda rises, her face resolute, but her glance lingers on the wooden box, the photo peeking out. As she steps into the snowy night, the wind carries her quiet determination, while Walter sits alone, his fingers tracing the box's initials, the candle's flame burning a little brighter, a fragile hope against the darkness. The snow falls in a steady curtain outside the Jenkins house, softening the harsh edges of the Montana morning, its flakes catching the pale light of a gray dawn. Inside, the air is thick with the residue of broken things, spilled beer, scattered wood shavings, and the lingering echo of a chair's destruction. Walter Jenkins, 63, stands in the cramped living room, his gaunt frame stooped, his eyes tracing the splintered remains of the chair he once crafted for love. The bruise on his cheek has faded to a sickly yellow, but the weight of his grief is heavier, etched into the lines of his weathered face. The wooden box, carved with W and M, sits untouched on a shelf, its presence a silent reminder of a family lost to time. Outside, the crunch of tires on snow breaks the stillness, followed by the low hum of an engine. Walter's head lifts, his brow furrowing as red and blue lights flicker through the frosted windows, painting the walls with an eerie glow. A sharp knock rattles the door, and Walter shuffles toward it, his steps uneven, his hands trembling. Two police officers stand on the porch, their faces stern but not unkind, their badges glinting in the cold. Behind them, Linda Parker hovers, her nurse's coat dusted with snow, her eyes fierce with resolve but softened by guilt. "Mr. Jenkins," one officer says, his voice steady, "we need to come in. We've had a report of possible elder abuse." Walter's breath catches, his gaze darting to Linda, who looks away, her jaw tight. The officers step inside, their boots tracking snow onto the linoleum, their eyes scanning the room. The empty bottles, the broken chair, the chaos of a house unraveling. Brian's heavy footsteps thud from upstairs, and he stumbles into view, his hoodie stained, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "What the hell's this?" he snarls, his voice thick with drink and defiance. The second officer steps forward, calm but firm. "We need to talk, Brian. We've got evidence, bruises, complaints. You're coming with us." Brian's face twists, rage flaring as he lunges toward the officer, shoving a chair aside with a crash. "You've got nothing. This is my house." The officers move swiftly, pinning his arms, the click of handcuffs sharp in the air. Brian thrashes, his curses echoing, but his strength falters, his body sagging as they pull him toward the door. Walter stands frozen, his hands clenched, his heart pounding as he watches his son struggle. "Don't hurt him," he whispers, his voice breaking, barely audible over Brian's shouts. "Please, don't hurt my boy." The words spill out, raw and desperate, a father's love tangled with the pain of betrayal. Linda steps closer, her hand hovering near Walter's arm, but he doesn't see her, his eyes locked on Brian, now slumped in the snow outside, his wrists bound. The officers guide Brian to the patrol car, its lights cutting through the falling snow, and Walter follows to the doorway, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The car door slams and Brian's face, pressed against the window, is a mask of anger and shame, his eyes meeting Walter's for a fleeting moment before looking away. Walter's gaze drifts to the wooden box on the shelf, its carved initials a distant echo of better days, but he doesn't move toward it, his hands hanging limp at his sides. Linda's voice breaks the silence, soft but heavy. "I had to, Walter. For you." He nods, barely, his face unreadable, the weight of her words sinking in. As the patrol car pulls away, its tires crunching through the snow, Walter stands alone in the doorway, the cold seeping into his bones, the house behind him silent except for the wind's mournful wail, carrying the truth into the frozen dawn. The snow falls gently now, its flakes drifting in the pale light of a Montana noon, adding a thin veil to the Jenkins house, which stands silent as a tomb. Inside, the cramped living room bears the scars of chaos. Splinters of the broken chair litter the floor, an empty beer bottle rolls in the corner, and the smell of old wood mingles with the biting cold of winter. Walter Jenkins, 63, sits in the worn armchair, his gaunt hands clutching a cold mug of tea, his eyes vacant, fixed on the door where the police car carrying Brian vanished into the snow. The bruise on his cheek has faded to a sickly yellow, but the ache in his heart cuts deeper, a dull blade twisting with every breath. The wooden box, carved with W and M, rests on the shelf, its worn surface catching the weak light from the window, a quiet reminder of days long gone. The wind outside has softened, but its mournful hum lingers, as if grieving for what has unfolded. Walter exhales, his breath clouding in the frigid air. He rises, joints creaking, and shuffles to the shelf. His trembling hands touch the wooden box, opening it. Inside, the faded photo of Brian and Mary stares back, their smiles a piercing wound. Beneath it, Brian's taped-together sketch of a mountain, drawn years ago, now shares space with a few splinters from the shattered chair, carefully placed by Walter. He murmurs, voice breaking, "I tried, Mary. I tried to hold it together." The words dissolve into the silence, unanswered. A knock at the door, soft but insistent, startles Walter. The mug nearly slips from his grip. Wiping his eyes, he shuffles to the door, opening it with a flicker of hesitation. Linda Parker stands there, her nurse's coat dusted with snow, her eyes heavy with worry but alight with resolve. In her hands is a small cloth bag, a freshly baked loaf of bread and a can of soup peeking out. "I couldn't leave you alone today," she says, her voice gentle but firm, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Walter steps back, managing a faint smile, but his eyes are distant, as if he's wandered too far into his own darkness. Linda sets the bag on the table, her gaze sweeping the room, the broken chair, the desolate chill, before settling on Walter. "Have you eaten?" she asks, her tone soft but laced with the care of someone who's seen too much pain. Walter shakes his head, sinking into the chair, still clutching the cold mug. "Not hungry," he whispers, but his voice falters, as if he doesn't believe his own words. Linda doesn't reply, only quietly retrieves a bowl from the kitchen shelf. Heating the soup on the old gas stove, the faint crackle of the flame a small comfort in the silent house. When she places the steaming bowl before Walter, he looks up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You don't have to do this, Linda," he says, his voice hoarse. "I'm fine." But Linda sits across from him, hands clasped, her gaze steady. "No, Walter, you're not fine. And you don't have to pretend with me." Her words are direct, yet warm, like a hand extended through a storm. Walter lowers his eyes, fingers gripping the table's edge, as if clinging to something to keep from drowning. A memory surges, sharp and painful. Brian, 10 years old, perched on the armchair, laughing as Mary taught him to fold paper airplanes. Walter, standing in the doorway, weary from a long day at the lumber yard, had only watched, his heart heavy with unpaid bills. He hadn't joined them, hadn't spoken, just turned away, leaving a void he never knew would grow in his son's heart. Now, sitting before Linda, Walter feels that void like a chasm, swallowing both him and Brian. Linda breaks the silence, her voice soft but resolute. "I've seen what you've done, Walter. That chair, this box." She lightly touches the box, her fingers tracing the W and M. "You've held on to love, even when everything fell apart. But you can't let it kill you. Brian, he needs time, maybe help he doesn't want to admit. But you have to live. For yourself." Her words cut through the fog in Walter's mind, not dispelling it, but enough to reveal a faint glimmer of light. Walter looks at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, but this time, he doesn't wipe them away. "I was wrong, Linda. I thought pushing him would make him stronger than me. But I just made him hate me." His voice cracks, but Linda shakes her head, her hand resting on his, gentle but firm. You did what you thought was right. Mistakes don't mean you didn't love him. And Brian, deep down, still needs you, even if he can't see it now. Outside, the snow falls softer, but the noon light filters through the window, catching the wooden box, making it glow like a small flame. Walter takes a deep breath, his fingers leaving the mug to touch the box's edge. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? He asks, his voice trembling, like a child seeking hope. Linda smiles, a sad but genuine smile. I don't know, Walter, but I know you have to forgive yourself first. The stove's faint crackle fills the air, the smell of soup spreading, and in that moment, the room feels a fraction warmer. Walter picks up the spoon, taking a sip of the hot soup, its warmth spreading through him, a reminder that he's still here, still alive. Linda sits quietly, her presence a steady light, not promising miracles, but enough to make Walter feel he's not alone. Outside, the snow falls lighter, as if the storm is easing, leaving a fragile world with a chance to heal. The snow has nearly stopped, leaving the Jenkins house cloaked in a heavy blanket of white, the Montana dusk settling over the landscape like a sigh. Inside, the living room is quieter now, the chaos of broken wood and spilled beer swept into a corner, though the air still carries the weight of loss. A single lamp, its bulb steadier than the flickering one before, casts a soft glow across the scarred table, where Walter Jenkins sits, his 63 years etched deeper into his face. His hands, no longer trembling, rest on the wooden box carved with W and M, its surface warm under his touch, as if it holds the last embers of a life he's struggling to reclaim. The bowl of soup Linda left is empty, a small victory against the cold that seeps through the walls. Outside, the world is still, the wind reduced to a faint whisper, but the silence in the house feels heavier, pregnant with the absence of Brian's angry footsteps. Walter's eyes drift to the window, where the last light of day fades into a deep blue, the glass fogged with his breath. He opens the box, fingers brushing the faded photo of Brian and Mary, the taped-together sketch, and the splinters of the broken chair. A faint smile tugs at his lips, bittersweet, as he lifts the sketch, tracing the childish lines of the mountain Brian once dreamed of. You saw the stars, didn't you, son? He murmurs, his voice soft, as if speaking to the boy in the drawing. A creak from the porch snaps Walter from his reverie, his heart lurching with a flicker of hope. He rises, slower now, his body protesting, and shuffles to the door, opening it to the bite of the evening air. No one stands there, just the snow, undisturbed except for a set of faint tracks leading to the road, already filling in. His shoulders sag, the hope fading as quickly as it came. He closes the door, leaning against it, the cold wood pressing into his back. The silence returns, but it's different now, not suffocating but expectant, as if waiting for him to choose what comes next. Walter returns to the table, his gaze falling on a small notebook Linda had left behind, tucked beside the bread. He opens it, finding a note in her neat handwriting. Walter, you're stronger than you know. Call me if you need me. Linda. Beneath the words, a phone number. He stares at it, fingers hovering, then sets it aside, not ready yet to reach out. Instead, he pulls a sheet of paper from the notebook, the pen still resting where he'd left it after his unfinished letter to Brian. He begins to write again, the words coming easier now, though each one carries the weight of years. Brian, he starts, the pen steady. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it. I was wrong to push you away from your dreams. I thought I was building you up, but I broke something instead. Your mother, she'd have known how to love you better. I'm learning, too late, but I'm learning. I don't know where you are tonight, but I hope you find your way back. Not to me, but to yourself. He pauses, the pen hovering, a memory surfacing. Brian, 16, standing in the yard under a summer moon, sketching the sky in secret, his face alight with a passion Walter hadn't understood. Walter had found the sketch later, tossed in the trash and kept it, taping it together when Brian wasn't looking. That act, small and hidden, feels like the truest thing he ever did for his son. He writes on, "I kept your drawing, son. It's here in the box with your mother's smile. It's not much, but it's yours whenever you're ready." The lamp flickers, just once, as Walter sets the pen down, folding the letter carefully. He places it in the wooden box, beside the photo and sketch, a new piece of his heart to join the others. For the first time in days, his chest feels lighter, as if the act of writing has loosened a knot he's carried too long. He rises, moving to the kitchen, where he lights the old stove, its flame a small defiance against the cold. He begins to clean, slow but deliberate, sweeping the wood shavings, righting a chair, wiping the table. Each motion is a step, not toward fixing the past, but toward living in the present. Outside, a distant sound breaks the stillness, the low rumble of a car engine, too far to be clear. Walter pauses, broom in hand, but doesn't go to the window. He knows it's not Brian, not yet. Instead, he returns to the box, closing it gently, and carries it to the shelf by the armchair. He sits, the notebook in his lap, Linda's note a quiet promise. The lamp glows steadily now, its light pooling around him, and for the first time in years, Walter feels a spark of something like peace. Not whole, not healed, but enough to keep going. The snow outside lies still, the Montana night deepening, but within the Jenkins house, a fragile warmth takes root, a flame kindled by words unwritten for too long, and the hope that, one day, they might be read. The snow had stopped. For the first time in weeks, the Montana sky opened above the Jenkins house, revealing a pale stretch of blue. The sun, weak but unwavering, cast light across the blanket of white, turning the frozen landscape into something almost serene. Inside, the house remained quiet, its walls still heavy with memory, but something had shifted. The broken chair was gone, the empty bottles cleared, and the scent of warm bread lingered faintly in the air. Walter Jenkins sat by the window in his armchair, a wool blanket tucked around his knees. His hair, thinner now, caught the sunlight like silver thread. In his lap rested the wooden box, carved with the initials W and M, worn smooth by the years. He opened it slowly, reverently. Inside, the photograph of Mary and young Brian smiled back, untouched by time. Beneath it lay the taped-together sketch of the mountain under the stars, faded but intact, and beside it, his final letter, the one he'd written weeks ago but never sent. His fingers brushed the paper, and he exhaled. Not with sorrow this time, but with acceptance. A knock broke the stillness. Not firm, not demanding, just hesitant. Walter turned his head. His heart, fragile but persistent, skipped once. Slowly, he pushed himself up, blanket falling away, and shuffled to the door. He opened it. There, on the porch, stood Brian. He looked older, thinner. The anger etched into his face had faded, replaced by something else. Uncertainty, weariness, regret. In his hands he held a paper bag, damp from the snow, the top folded neatly. "I brought coffee," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thought maybe you'd want some." Walter didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he stepped aside, just enough. Brian hesitated only a second longer before crossing the threshold. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Later, they sat at the table, father and son. Steam curling from chipped mugs, the silence between them no longer sharp, but soft. Outside, the snow began to melt in slow, steady rivulets, dripping from the roof like the release of an old sorrow. On the shelf, the wooden box remained open, its contents untouched. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a shrine. Felt like a beginning. Some wounds take years to scar over. But sometimes, healing begins with a single knock on the door. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real, human stories that remind us that even in the coldest moments, love can still thaw the heart.